September 15th, 1945. Dawn is 3 minutes away. Inside a ruined storage shed on the remote Pacific island of Saipan, 47 Japanese women and children sat in absolute silence. Not because they were told to be quiet, but because each of them believed these were the last minutes of their lives. They had spent the entire night preparing to die with honor, whispering prayers, clutching hidden blades, holding their children one final time. But when that door finally opened, what walked in wasn't death. It was a United States Marine carrying something that would shatter everything they'd been taught to believe about their enemy. This is the story of the breakfast that changed history. The pale gray light of approaching dawn leaked through gaps in the wooden walls. Inside the shed, the air was thick with the smell of fear. Sweat. Urine where a terrified child had lost control. The breathing of 47 people trying to stay quiet, trying to be brave, trying to accept what they believed was coming. Keiko Matsumoto sat with her back against the rough wooden wall, her arms wrapped so tightly around her two children that they could barely breathe. Her daughter Yuki, 6 years old, pressed her face into her mother's chest. Her son Hiro, just 3, had finally fallen into exhausted sleep in her lap after crying for most of the night. Keiko was 32 years old. She had been a school teacher in Tokyo before the war, a woman who believed in education and logic and observation. But logic had abandoned her the moment American forces surrounded the shed. Now there was only fear and the desperate hope that when death came, it would be quick for her children. She had rehearsed her own death 1,000 times in the past 12 hours. But rehearsing and experiencing were two different things entirely. Outside, she could hear voices speaking English. The sharp foreign sounds of American soldiers, heavy boots on gravel, the clanking of metal equipment, the scrape of something being dragged across the ground. An elderly woman named Fumiko Yamada, sitting near the door, turned to the others with certainty in her voice. "They are digging," she whispered, "preparing graves." Another woman began to cry softly. "Mass graves, just like the propaganda said." Keiko closed her eyes and thought of her husband Hiroshi, dead now for 15 months, killed during the American invasion when the building he was trying to evacuate collapsed from artillery fire. He had died pushing women and children into a shelter. He had died protecting others. She had promised him in those final hours before the shelling separated them forever that she would keep their children safe, that she would be strong. But what did strong mean when you were about to watch your children die? The night had been endless. Hour after hour of darkness, of whispered prayers of mothers trying to comfort children who ask questions no child should have to ask. "Mama, are they going to hurt us? Mama, I'm scared. Mama, will it hurt when we die?" Keiko had no answers. She could only hold them and lie. "We will be brave. We will face whatever comes with honor. Your father would be proud." But inside she was screaming. For months they had been hiding in caves across Saipan, surviving on whatever they could scavenge, watching their children grow thinner, weaker, more hollow-eyed with each passing day. 7 children in their group had died from dysentery alone. Tiny bodies wrapped in whatever cloth could be spared, buried in shallow graves dug by bare hands. The propaganda had been relentless even in hiding. Radio broadcasts when they could find a working receiver, community leaders repeating the same warnings over and over. Posters that had been plastered across every wall before the Americans came showing grotesque caricatures of American soldiers with demon faces with blood dripping from their fangs. "Americans will not spare you. Better to die with honor than fall into their hands. Better to choose the blade than humiliation." They had shown images, Americans dragging women through streets by their hair, Americans laughing as they executed prisoners, Americans stripping civilians of their dignity in ways too horrible to describe in detail, but vivid enough to burn into every mind. Every rumor made the next one worse. Every whisper added another layer of terror. Keiko believed it. When you're starving, when your children waste away before your eyes, fear becomes easier to accept than hope. 3 days ago, the Americans had found them. The group had been surviving in this abandoned storage shed near what used to be a civilian settlement. The area had been destroyed during the battle for Saipan over a year ago, and they thought it was far enough from American patrols to be safe. They were wrong. The Marines had surrounded the shed at dusk. Keiko remembered the moment she heard the first voice shout in English. Her blood had turned to ice. Fumiko had immediately pulled out the small blade she kept hidden in her clothing. "We do it now," Fumiko had whispered. her wrinkled hands shaking but her voice steady. Before they come inside, we die on our own terms. But Keiko had grabbed her wrist, not because she wasn't afraid, not because she thought surrender was honorable, but because of something Hiroshi had told her in those final hours before he died. It had been June 15th, 1944. The American invasion was in full force. Shells were falling like rain. Hiroshi had pulled her aside away from the chaos, knowing these might be his last words to her. "Keiko, if something happens to me," he had begun. "Don't talk like that," she had pleaded. "Listen to me, the Americans. I've seen their engineering work, their supply systems, their field hospitals. These are not the work of animals. These are not the actions of demons." She had stared at him, shocked. "But the propaganda says, propaganda teaches us what to fear, but education teaches us to observe." His eyes had been intense, desperate for her to understand. "Promise me, if you are ever captured, observe before you act. For the children's sake, observe first. Give them 1 minute to show you who they really are before you make the final choice." "I promise," she had whispered. And now, 15 months later, sitting in this shed with death approaching, she was trying to keep that promise. So when Fumiko had raised her blade, Keiko had stopped her. "Wait, we observe first." Fumiko had looked at her like she was insane. But something in Keiko's voice, some desperate authority, had made the older woman hesitate. They had spent the night in that limbo, waiting, listening, preparing for death, but not yet embracing it. The American voices outside had been active all night. Not aggressive shouting, not cruel laughter, just efficient, organized sounds. Orders being given, equipment being moved, and those strange scraping sounds that everyone assumed were shovels digging graves. Now dawn was approaching. The gray light was growing stronger. Soon the sun would rise fully, and whatever the Americans had planned would begin. Scanning the shed, Keiko saw the other faces. Mothers holding children, young women holding each other. Old women sitting with dignity, ready to face death as they had faced everything else in their long lives. Chieko Nakamura, 44 years old, had been a nurse before the war. She sat with her medical bag, now empty of supplies, clutched to her chest. She had watched so many die, had tried to save them with herbs and prayer when there was no medicine left. Her face was pragmatic, resigned. "If they want us dead, we will be dead soon enough," she had said hours ago. "No point wasting our last strength on fear." Akari Sato was 19 and 7 months pregnant. Her husband had died at Iwo Jima. She had been so young when she married, barely 17. Now she sat with both hands on her swollen belly, whispering apologies to the baby who would never be born. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you won't see the world. I tried to keep you safe. I tried." And there were the children. 12 children in total among the group, ranging from infants to Yuki at 6 years old. They sat quietly, absorbing the fear of their mothers, understanding on some primal level that something terrible was about to happen. Keiko had tried to teach them during the months of hiding. She had scratched lessons in the dirt with sticks, mathematics, reading, history, trying to maintain some normalcy, some connection to the world before war had consumed everything. Yuki had been an eager student. "Mama, when the war is over, can I go to your school?" "Yes, sweet one, when the war is over." But the war was over now. Japan had surrendered. They had heard the radio broadcast, the emperor's voice announcing the inconceivable. And yet they were still hiding, still terrified, because surrender changed nothing about what they believed would happen if the Americans caught them. Footsteps approached outside. Heavy boots. Multiple men. Every woman in the shed tensed. Children began to whimper. Mothers shushed them gently, trying to give them courage they didn't feel. Fumiko stood up, her spine straight despite her 67 years. "We will walk to our execution with dignity," she announced to the group. "We are Japanese. We do not cower. We face death with honor." Several other women stood as well, preparing themselves. The wooden door creaked. The sound was like thunder in the silent shed. Light flooded in, blinding after the darkness. Keiko squinted against it, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. 3 silhouettes stood in the doorway. American Marines. She could see the outline of their helmets, their broad shoulders, their rifles. This was it, the moment they had been dreading. But something was wrong. The rifles were lowered, not raised, not aimed at anyone. One of the Marines stepped forward into the shed. He removed his helmet, and Keiko could see his face. Young, maybe 28 or 30, pale skin, light brown hair, blue eyes that looked tired but not cruel. Behind him, another soldier spoke. His voice was gentler than she expected, and when he spoke, it was in Japanese, a Japanese-American interpreter. Please, the interpreter said, no one will be harmed. We need you to come outside. No one moved. This had to be a trick, a cruel game before the execution. The lead Marine, the one with the blue eyes, said something in English. The interpreter translated. Sergeant Mitchell says, please, the children must be hungry. We have food. Come outside and eat. Food that made no sense. Why would they offer food before an execution? Fumiko's voice was sharp with suspicion. A lie to make us compliant. But Chieko, the pragmatic nurse, stood up. If they wanted us dead, they would have shot us already. If this is poison, at least we die with full stomachs instead of empty ones. The Marines stepped back from the doorway, creating space, not advancing into the shed like invaders, but retreating like they were trying not to frighten cornered animals. Sergeant Mitchell, the blue-eyed American, said something else. The interpreter translated, and his voice carried an unexpected note of pleading. Please, for the children. They need to eat. No one will hurt them. You have my word. Fumiko moved first. She walked to the door with her head held high, every step a declaration that she would not show fear. We will go to our death with dignity, she said quietly to the others. One by one, the women and children began to follow. Keiko stood on shaking legs, lifting Hiro into her arms. The 3-year-old was so light now, so much lighter than he should be. Yuki clutched her mother's kimono with small fists. Mama, are they going to kill us? Yuki whispered. I don't know, sweet one, but we stay together. No matter what happens, we stay together. They filed out into the morning light. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A beautiful dawn, perhaps their last. Keiko's eyes adjusted to the brightness. She braced herself for what she would see. No execution pit, no ropes hanging from trees, no line of Marines with rifles raised. Instead, there was a table, a long wooden table, rough-hewn but sturdy, set up about 20 feet from the shed. It was covered with a white cloth, and on that cloth was food. Keiko stared. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. It made no sense. None of this made sense. Fresh bread piled high. Steam rose in delicate wisps, carrying the scent of yeast and warmth. The bread was white, soft-looking, nothing like the hardtack they had been eating in caves. Butter, small pats of yellow butter arranged on a plate, rice porridge in large pots. The aroma, familiar, devastating, transported her to Tokyo mornings when the world was safe. Bacon. She didn't know the English word for it yet, but the smell of pork fat frying was unmistakable. Rich and savory and completely unexpected. Scrambled eggs, yellow and fluffy, more eggs than she had seen in over a year. Tea in large thermoses. She could smell it hot and genuine. Fruit, red apples that shined in the morning light. Bananas without a single bruise. Oranges, and in the center of the table, stamped clearly on a cardboard box, U.S. Army rations. This wasn't prisoner food. This wasn't slop thrown on the ground for enemies to fight over. This was breakfast, a real breakfast, the kind of breakfast you serve to human beings. The 47 women and children stood frozen, staring at the table like it was a hallucination. Like if they blinked, it might disappear. The Marines stood 20 feet back, far enough to give space, close enough to be clearly visible. Sergeant Mitchell said something in English, and the interpreter spoke again. Please, eat. You must be hungry. The children especially. This food is for you. Still no one moved, because this had to be a trick. Poison, perhaps. Or maybe they would let them eat and then laissez-faire them, humiliate them, make them feel like animals before the execution came. Fumiko voiced what they were all thinking. Poison or humiliation. They make us eat like dogs while they laugh. Chieko stepped forward. If they wanted us dead, we would already be dead. If it is poison, then we die with full stomachs. Either way, I am tired of being afraid. She walked to the table. Every eye watched her. She reached out with a trembling hand and picked up a piece of bread. She brought it to her mouth. She bit. For 30 seconds, no one breathed. They watched Chieko chew, watched her swallow. She did not collapse. She did not scream. She did not laugh hysterically or show any sign of poison. She took another bite, and then her eyes filled with tears. "It's real," she whispered. "It's real bread. It's good." Another woman rushed forward, grabbing a bowl of rice porridge for her sick daughter. Then another mother, then another. Keiko stood rooted in place, still holding Hiro, still feeling Yuki pressed against her leg. Her mind was racing, trying to understand, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she had been taught to believe. Hiro stirred in her arms. He had woken up at some point during the exodus from the shed, and now his eyes were wide, staring at the food on the table. "Mama," he whispered, "onaka suita." "I'm hungry." Those two words broke something in her. Her baby was hungry, had been hungry for so long. And there was food, right there, food that other women were eating without dying. But still she hesitated, because accepting this kindness meant accepting that everything she believed might be wrong. And that was more terrifying than death. Sergeant Mitchell must have seen her hesitation. He knelt down, lowering himself to be less intimidating. He said something in English. The interpreter translated. "Ma'am, your children need to eat, please." "I have children too, I understand." Her gaze searched his features, hunting for the demon propaganda promised. But all she saw was a young man with tired eyes. A man who looked like he hadn't slept well in a very long time. A man who was holding his body language carefully, deliberately unthreatening. Hiro began to squirm in her arms. "Mama, please, can I have bread?" Yuki tugged on her kimono. "Mama, I'm so hungry." Keiko made a decision, perhaps the last decision she would ever make. She walked slowly toward the table, her children with her. Her hands were shaking so badly that when she reached for a piece of bread, she dropped it. Immediately, a different Marine stepped forward. Younger than Mitchell, blonde hair, a southern drawl when he spoke English. Corporal Turner, she would learn later. He picked up the dropped bread, set it aside, and offered her a fresh piece. "Here you go, ma'am. Fresh one for you." The kindness in the gesture nearly undid her. An enemy soldier showing her courtesy, treating her like a person worthy of respect. She took the bread with trembling hands. She tore off a small piece and gave it to Hiro. Her son took it, looked at it, bit into it. His eyes went impossibly wide. "Oka-san," he cried. "Amai, mother, it's sweet." He began to eat with the desperate hunger of a child who had been starving for months. Tears streamed down his face as he chewed. Not tears of pain, tears of overwhelming relief. "More?" he asked through a mouthful of bread. "Can I have more?" Keiko gave him another piece. Then she broke off some for Yuki, who took it with shaking hands and ate with the same desperate hunger. And then Keiko took a bite herself. The bread was soft, impossibly soft after months of hardtack and moldy crackers. It melted on her tongue. There was a hint of sweetness in the dough, just a touch of sugar that made it taste like comfort and normalcy, and everything the world had been before war destroyed it. The butter, when she tried it, was rich and creamy. It coated her mouth with a richness she had forgotten existed. All 47 were eating now. Some were crying, some were eating in silence. Some were trying to slow down and savor it, but hunger won, and they ate quickly, desperately. The Marines stood back and watched. They didn't interfere, didn't comment, didn't laugh. They simply stood guard, ensuring no one was threatened, and occasionally brought more food from somewhere out of sight when supplies ran low. Hiro had eaten 4 slices of bread. His little belly was fuller than it had been in months. He looked up at his mother with something that might have been joy, and then he did something that made every adult freeze. He ran to Sergeant Mitchell and wrapped his small arms around the American's leg in a hug. "Thank you, Mr. Soldier," he said in Japanese. "Thank you for bread." Time stopped. Every Japanese woman stared in horror. A Japanese child embracing an American soldier. It was unthinkable, wrong, a betrayal of everything they had been taught. But Sergeant Mitchell did not laugh, did not push the child away. He knelt down slowly, carefully, and gently patted Hiro's head. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. A chocolate bar. He offered it to Hiro, but his eyes moved to Keiko first, asking permission. Keiko found herself nodding, unable to speak. Hiro took the chocolate. He had never seen chocolate before. He bit into it, and his face transformed with wonder. Mama, it's sweet. It's so sweet. Sergeant Mitchell smiled, a genuine smile. And then he did something that shattered the last of Keiko's certainty. He pulled out his wallet from his pocket, opened it, showed Hero a photograph. In the photo was a woman, blonde, smiling, standing in front of a white farmhouse. And in her arms were two children. A boy about Hero's age, a girl about Yuki's age. Mitchell pointed to the photo. "My kids," he said in English. Then in halting, heavily accented Japanese, he added, "Same like you." The interpreter translated more fully. "Sergeant Mitchell has two children at home in America, a boy who is 3 years old like yours. He wants you to know he understands. He is a father too." Keiko stared at the photograph, at this evidence of the enemy's humanity, this proof that demons had families, that demons loved their children. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the bread anymore, because in that moment she understood. Everything they had been taught was a lie. The Americans were not demons. They were men, fathers, husbands, sons, human beings who were capable of kindness even to their enemies. Around her, the same realization dawned on face after face. The propaganda had lied. They had been taught to fear monsters. But what stood before them were simply men who had chosen mercy over cruelty. Fumiko sank to the ground, dignity forgotten. The bread in her hands might as well have been a miracle. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I don't understand any of this." The sun continued to rise, the women continued to eat. The Marines continued to stand guard, patient and unthreatening. And slowly, minute by minute, the certainty of death began to transform into the shocking possibility of survival. Keiko held her children close and thought of Hiroshi. What would he say if he could see this? Would he be angry that she accepted food from the enemy? Or would he be relieved that his children were eating, were safe, were alive? She thought she knew the answer. Hiroshi had told her to observe, and she had observed, and what she had observed was changing everything. The breakfast continued as the morning light grew stronger. 47 people who had expected to die at dawn were instead eating bread and butter and eggs and fruit, were instead watching their children smile for the first time in months, were instead confronting the impossible truth that mercy could exist even in war. And Keiko Matsumoto, school teacher, widow mother, made a decision. She would remember everything, every detail of this morning, every kindness shown, every moment that contradicted the propaganda. Because if they survived this, someone needed to tell the truth. Someone needed to remember that on September 15th, 1945, a group of American Marines chose to feed their enemies instead of executing them. Someone needed to remember the breakfast that changed everything. The breakfast that first morning was just the beginning. What came next was somehow even more disorienting than the initial shock of mercy, because the Americans kept doing it, day after day after day. The pattern became sacred. 7 a.m. breakfast, noon lunch, 6 p.m. dinner, hot food, real portions. Children always served first. By the third day, terror faded into wary acceptance. By the fifth, children smiled at approaching Marines. By the seventh, Keiko no longer flinched at the sound of boots on gravel. Even Fumiko, who initially refused American canned ham, admitted grudgingly after 3 days, not traditional, but acceptable. Once Corporal Turner had brought what he called apple pie, made with army rations and improvisation. The children had stared at it with wide eyes, unsure what to make of the strange pastry. But when they tasted it warm and cinnamon sweet, several of them had laughed out loud. Pure, unburdened laughter. The first Keiko had heard since before Hiroshi died. But it wasn't just the food that was disorienting. It was everything else. The medical care, for instance. On the second day, an American Navy nurse had arrived, a woman. Keiko had expected someone harsh, military, cold. Instead, the nurse was gentle, methodical. She examined every child, checking for signs of malnutrition, disease, injury. She asked permission before touching anyone. She smiled at the children and spoke to them softly, even though they couldn't understand English. Miyuki Tanaka's 6-year-old daughter had been sick for weeks. Fever that wouldn't break. Cough that rattled in her small chest. Chieko had done everything she could with herbs and prayer. But without real medicine, the child was fading. The American nurse took one look at her and immediately called for a doctor. Within an hour, a military doctor arrived with antibiotics. Actual medicine. He explained through the interpreter what the pills were, How many to give, how often? He checked the child's temperature, listened to her lungs, and left enough medication for a full course of treatment. 3 days later, the fever broke. The child sat up and asked for food. Real food, not just broth. She ate rice and smiled at her mother, and Miyuki had wept with relief. They saved her, Miyuki whispered to Keiko that evening. The enemy saved my daughter. Keiko had no response. What could she say that propaganda had taught them? Americans would kill children, not heal them, that everything they believed was turning out to be wrong. The routine continued. Days blended together. September stretched toward October. The war was officially over. But for the 47 people in this camp, a different kind of war was being waged. A war between everything they had been taught to believe and everything they were experiencing. It was on the 5th day that understanding began to crystallize. Hiro, her 3-year-old son, had been playing near the edge of the camp's designated safe zone. He was chasing a small lizard, the way children do when they rediscover joy. From a distance, she marveled at how quickly children recover when given food and safety. Sergeant Mitchell was distributing blankets that afternoon. The nights were getting cooler, and the Americans had brought supplies to ensure no one was cold. He was working methodically, giving each family what they needed, maintaining his careful distance. Hiro saw him and immediately ran over. The little boy had lost all fear of the Americans. To him, they were the people who gave him chocolate and bread. Simple 3-year-old logic. Mr. Soldier, Hiro called out in Japanese using the title he had given Mitchell. Mr. Soldier looked lizard. Mitchell stopped what he was doing. He knelt down to Hiro's level, smiling at the child's enthusiasm. He said something in English, his tone warm and amused. Then he did something that would stay with Keiko forever. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, the same wallet from the first morning. He opened it and showed Hiro the photograph again, the picture of his own children. But this time Hiro looked more carefully. He pointed at the little boy in the photo. Same, he asked in Japanese. Same like me, Mitchell nodded. He held up 3 fingers. 3, he said in English. Then in his broken Japanese, Sansai, 3 years old. Hiro's eyes went wide. He 3 like me. Mitchell smiled and nodded again. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled out another photograph from his wallet. This one showed a farm. Wide fields, a white house with a porch, a barn in the background, a simple rural American scene. He showed it to Hiro, pointing to different parts of the picture and naming them in English. Farm, house, barn. Curiosity drew Keiko closer. Yuki followed, curious about what her brother was seeing. Mitchell saw them approach. He stood up slowly, respectfully, and offered the photograph to Keiko. She took it with trembling hands, looked at this window into the enemy's life. It wasn't what she expected. She had imagined America as all big cities, all steel and concrete and military might. But this photograph showed something else. A farm, crops, simple wooden buildings. A life that looked in many ways like the rural Japanese communities she had known before the war. Iowa, Mitchell said, pointing to the photograph. Then through the interpreter who had appeared beside them, he explained, my home, my family's farm. We grow corn and soybeans. My father and grandfather farmed this land before me. Keiko stared at the image. You are a farmer. I was. Before the war. After the war, I will be again. You want to go home to farm. Mitchell's expression shifted. Something vulnerable crossed his face. Yes, ma'am. More than anything, I want to go home to my family and never see another battlefield. She saw him differently now. He wasn't a soldier by choice. He was a farmer who had been called to war. A father who wanted nothing more than to return to his children. Just like Hiroshi had been, an engineer who became a soldier because his country demanded it. A father who had fought not because he loved war, but because he loved his family and believed he was protecting them. The parallel was too clear to ignore. Your children, Keiko said quietly, you miss them very much. It wasn't a question. She could see the answer in his eyes. Every day, Mitchell said through the interpreter, every single day, I carry their pictures with me. When things get hard, I look at these photos and remember why I have to stay alive, why I have to try to be a good man even in bad circumstances. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. Then he continued, his voice lower, more personal. Ma'am, can I tell you something? The first time I saw you and your children that first morning, all I could think about was my own kids back home. My son Tommy is the same age as yours. My daughter Sarah is same age as your Yuki. And I thought if the situation were reversed, if my children were scared and hungry, and some Japanese soldier found them, I would pray that soldier would be kind, that he would see them as children. First enemies, second. Her vision blurred. She blinked rapidly against the sting. That is why you are kind to us, because you think of your own children. That's part of it, but it's also because my mama raised me to treat people right. She always said, Bobby, anyone can be cruel. It takes a real man to choose kindness when he has the power to do otherwise. Bobby, his mother called him Bobby, even demons, it seemed, had mothers who loved them. Yuki tugged on Keiko's sleeve. Mama, can I see the picture? Keiko handed the photograph to her daughter. Yuki studied it carefully, her 6-year-old mind processing what she was seeing. Mr. Mitchell has a farm, Yuki said. Papa wanted to live on a farm someday. Remember, he said, when the war was over, maybe we could move somewhere with open space. Keiko remembered. One of Hiroshi's dreams. After the war, he had said they would leave Tokyo, find a quiet place, raise their children somewhere they could see stars at night. The war had taken that dream. But here was this American, this supposed enemy, who had the life Hiroshi had wanted. Mitchell was watching her face, seeing emotions she couldn't hide. He said something in English, and the interpreter translated. Sergeant Mitchell says he's very sorry for your loss. He can see in your eyes that you lost someone important. He wants you to know he's seen too much death in this war, on both sides. He's tired of it. That's why he's trying to do this right. To show that not everything about war has to be about killing. Keiko nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Mitchell carefully put the photographs back in his wallet. Then he pulled out something else. A Hershey's chocolate bar. He offered it to Yuki. For you, he said in his broken Japanese. Good girl. Very brave. Yuki looked at her mother for permission. Keiko nodded. Yuki took the chocolate with both hands, holding it like treasure. Arigatou gozaimasu, Yuki said formally, bowing the way she had been taught. Thank you very much. Mitchell bowed back, attempting the gesture with obvious unfamiliarity, but genuine respect. Then he straightened, said something to the interpreter, and walked away to continue distributing blankets. Keiko watched him go. This man who carried photographs of his children. This man who missed his farm. This man who was trying to be kind in the middle of war's brutality. That evening, Keiko gathered Yuki and Hiro close. They sat together wrapped in the new blankets the Americans had provided, watching the sun set over the Pacific. Children, Keiko said softly, I want to tell you something important. Something you must remember. They looked up at her with trusting eyes. We were taught that Americans were demons, monsters. We were taught to fear them more than anything. Do you remember? Yuki nodded. The teachers said they would hurt us. Yes, that's what we were told. But what have you seen? What has actually happened? Hiro spoke up immediately. Mr. Soldier gave me chocolate and bread. He's nice. Yuki was more thoughtful. They bring us food every day. The nurse made Miyuki-san's daughter better. Corporal Turner made us that sweet pie thing. Yes, Keiko said. So here is what I want you to remember. People can tell you things. They can show you pictures and make you afraid. But sometimes the truth is different from what you're told. Sometimes you have to look with your own eyes and think with your own mind. Like Papa said, Yuki asked, observe first. Keiko felt her heart clench. Yes, exactly like Papa said. He was a very smart man. He knew that the truth is always more complicated than simple stories about good and evil. She pulled them closer. I don't know what will happen to us. I don't know if we'll go home or stay here or what comes next. But I want you to remember this time. Remember that even in war, even between enemies, people can choose to be kind. Remember that Mr. Mitchell and the other Americans could have hurt us, but they chose not to. They chose to fight us and protect us instead. Because he has children too, Hirohiro asked. That's part of it, but also because some people, no matter what side they're on, try to do what's right. Even when it's hard. Even when war tells them they don't have to. The three of them sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear bright and clear in the tropical sky. Keiko thought about the weeks ahead, about the uncertainty of their future, about the fact that 47 Japanese civilians were alive, because American soldiers had chosen mercy over expedience. She thought about Hiroshi, about what he would say if he could see them now. She liked to think he would be relieved, that he would tell her she had kept her promise, that she had observed before acting, that she had kept their children alive. The next morning followed the same pattern. 7 o'clock. Breakfast. The Marines arriving with food and careful courtesy. But on this morning, something new happened. A different American appeared, older than the others, more stars on his collar, which Keiko had learned meant higher rank. A commander of some kind. He gathered all the Marines and spoke to them in English. Then the interpreter translated for the Japanese civilians. Ladies and children. The commander began, his voice formal, but not unkind. I am Colonel Harrison. I oversee this sector. I've been receiving reports about your care from Sergeant Mitchell and his team. I wanted to come personally to ensure you are being treated properly. He paused, looking at the faces watching him with varying degrees of fear and confusion. The war is over. Emperor Hirohito has surrendered. You are no longer our enemies. You are civilians under our protection until we can arrange for your repatriation to Japan. Repatriation, the words sent a ripple through the group. Going home, the possibility of going home. In the coming weeks, the colonel continued, representatives from the Red Cross will visit. They will help you contact your families. They will document your experiences, and when transportation is available, you will be returned to Japan with supplies and assistance. Fumiko, who had been silent for days processing everything she had witnessed, stood up. She spoke in Japanese, and the interpreter translated for the colonel. Why are you kind to us? We are Japanese. Your enemies? Why do you feed us? Why do you heal our children? The colonel looked at her for a long moment before responding. Ma'am, I've been a soldier for 23 years. I've fought in 2 wars now. I've seen the worst that human beings can do to each other. I've seen cruelty that would make you sick to hear about. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I've also seen something else. I've seen that after the fighting stops, we have a choice. We can continue to be cruel, or we can try to be better. We can treat the defeated as enemies forever, or we can treat them as human beings who happen to be on the other side of a conflict they didn't start. His voice grew stronger. The United States of America fought this war because we believed in certain principles. Freedom, dignity, the value of human life. If we win the war but lose those principles in the process, then what was the point? If we become the monsters your propaganda claimed we were, then we've lost something more important than any battle. The interpreter translated, and Keiko watched the words land on the faces around her. Fumiko stood very still, processing. So we feed you because you're hungry. We heal your children because they're sick. We give you blankets because the nights are cold. Not because we're saints, not because we're better than anyone else, but because this is who we're supposed to be. This is what America is supposed to stand for. He looked around at all of them. I know propaganda taught you to fear us. Some of it was based on truth. War brings out the worst in men, but it can also bring out the best. We're trying every day to be better than our worst moments. The colonel nodded to Sergeant Mitchell, then turned to leave. But Fumiko spoke again. Colonel Harrison-san. He stopped and turned back. I am 67 years old. I have lived through much. I have lost much. I believed I knew what Americans were. I was wrong. On behalf of these mothers and children, I say thank you for proving propaganda to be lies. The old woman bowed, deeply, the formal bow of profound respect. The colonel stood silent for a moment. Then he returned the bow, equally formal, equally respectful. After he left, the group sat in stunned silence. The world they thought they understood kept crumbling, revealing something more complex underneath. Chieko spoke first. I've been thinking, when we go home, what do we tell people? How do we explain this? We tell the truth, Keiko said quietly. Exactly what happened. No embellishment, just the facts. We were captured. We expected death. We received mercy instead. The Americans fed us, healed us, treated us with dignity. That's the truth. People won't believe it, another woman said. They'll think we're lying or that we were brainwashed. Let them think what they want, Fumiko said, her voice carrying the weight of her years. I know what I've seen. I know what propaganda told me, and I know what these Americans showed me. The truth doesn't care if people believe it. It remains true. Over the following days, something remarkable happened. The women began to organize themselves, not because the Americans told them to, but because structure helped create normalcy. Fumiko became the unofficial leader assigning daily tasks. Some women helped with meal distribution. Others organized childcare rotations. Chieko set up a medical corner with the first aid supplies the Americans had provided, teaching other women basic health care. And Keiko, because she was a teacher, started lessons for the children again. She had no books, no proper supplies, but the Americans had given them paper and pencils, and that was enough. She taught reading and writing and mathematics. She taught history carefully now, trying to separate truth from propaganda. She taught her students to observe and think critically. One morning, Yuki came to her mother with a drawing she had made. It showed stick figures, a Japanese woman and child on one side, an American soldier on the other, and between them a table with food. "This is our story," Yuki said, "the story of the breakfast. Can I give this to Mr. Mitchell?" Keiko looked at the drawing, at her daughter's interpretation of their experience. Simple, honest, hopeful. "Yes," she said, "I think he would like that very much." That afternoon, Yuki approached Mitchell shyly. She held out the drawing with both hands. "For you," she said in Japanese. "Thank you for being kind." Mitchell took the drawing carefully as if it were made of glass. He looked at it for a long time. Then he did something that surprised everyone watching. He removed his helmet. Inside, he had photos of his family tucked into the lining. He carefully placed Yuki's drawing with those photos, then put the helmet back on. "I'll keep this forever," he said through the interpreter. "When I go home and people ask me about the war, I'll show them this. I'll tell them about a brave little girl named Yuki who reminded me why we fight. Not to destroy, but to protect. Not to create enemies, but to create the possibility of peace." He knelt down and looked Yuki in the eyes. "Thank you," he said in careful Japanese. "You gave me a gift, very special gift." Yuki beamed with pride. Watching Mitchell kneel before her daughter Keiko understood circumstances made enemies, but character revealed humanity. She thought about the months ahead, about going home to Japan, about trying to rebuild in a country that had lost everything, about raising her children in a world that would have to learn how to make peace after years of war. And she made a decision. She would document everything, every detail of their treatment, every kindness shown, every moment that contradicted the propaganda. She would write it all down and give it to the Red Cross so that others would know. So that history would record not just the battles and the bombs, but also the small moments when humanity had chosen to be better than war demanded. Because if propaganda could teach people to hate, maybe truth could teach them to hope. That night, Keiko began documenting everything. Page after page in careful script. The terror, the breakfast, the daily mercy, Mitchell's photographs, Fumiko's transformation. If they survived, the truth needed to be told. 3 weeks had passed since that first breakfast. 3 weeks of steady routine, of careful kindness, of a world being rebuilt one meal at a time. October arrived with cooler mornings and the growing certainty that something was about to change. Keiko could feel it in the way the Marines moved with slightly more urgency, in the increased visits from officers with clipboards and official papers, in the way supplies were being cataloged and organized more systematically. The repatriation was coming. They were going home. The announcement came on a clear Tuesday morning. The same colonel who had visited before returned, this time with Red Cross representatives. A woman in a crisp uniform stood beside him, her face kind but professional. "Ladies," the colonel began through the interpreter, "we have finalized arrangements for your return to Japan. Ships are being prepared. Within 4 to 6 weeks, you will be transported to the mainland." The Red Cross representative stepped forward. She was older, perhaps 50, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She introduced herself as Mrs. Eleanor Patterson. "I understand this is a difficult time," she said, her voice gentle. "You've survived something terrible. Now you face the challenge of going home to an uncertain future. The Red Cross is here to help facilitate that transition." She explained new clothes, medical checks, letters home, testimony if willing. "Your stories matter," Mrs. Patterson said, "not for propaganda, not for politics, but for history, for ensuring that what happened here, good and bad, is recorded truthfully." Keiko felt the weight of the pages she had been writing, now a thick stack of careful documentation. This was the moment to share them. That afternoon, she approached Mrs. Patterson privately. "I have written everything," Keiko said through an interpreter. "Every day since the first breakfast. I want to give this to you. I want people to know the truth." Mrs. Patterson took the pages with obvious respect. She flipped through them, seeing the careful Japanese characters, the detailed observations, the honest accounting of transformation from terror to trust. "Mrs. Matsumoto," she said, "this is extraordinary. With your permission, I would like to have this translated and included in our official records. Your testimony could help shape how prisoners of war are treated in the future." Keiko nodded. "That is why I wrote it. My husband told me to observe before judging. I observed. Now others should know what I saw." But even as preparations for departure began, something unexpected happened. Something that would test everything these women had learned about their supposed enemies. It started with Akari. The 19-year-old expectant mother had been doing well. The regular meals and medical care had helped her pregnancy progress more safely than anyone had dared hope. But she was still 7 months along, and the stress of everything they had endured had taken its toll. On the 23rd day of their captivity, Akari woke before dawn with pain. At first she tried to hide it, not wanting to cause trouble. But when the contractions grew stronger and she saw blood, she knew. The baby was coming. Too early. Far too early. Chieko examined her quickly, her nurse's training kicking in. Her face went pale. "We need help. Real medical help. Now." The American guards were alerted immediately. Within minutes, Sergeant Mitchell was there, his face serious. "How bad?" "The baby is coming early," Chieko said through hasty translation. 2 months early. She's bleeding. We need a doctor, a real hospital. We need help we cannot provide." Mitchell didn't hesitate. He ran to the communications tent. Keiko watched him speaking urgently into a radio, his whole body tense with focus. 20 minutes later, a military ambulance arrived. A Navy doctor emerged, a man in his 40s with steady hands and calm eyes. Behind him came 2 medics carrying equipment. The doctor examined Akari quickly, professionally. He spoke in rapid English to Mitchell, who translated through the interpreter. "He says the baby is in distress. She's hemorrhaging internally. They need to do emergency surgery, a cesarean section, but the conditions here aren't adequate. They need to take her to the field hospital." Panic rippled through the Japanese women. "Take her away, separate her from the group," but Akari, in pain and terrified, looked at Keiko. "Will they save my baby?" Keiko looked at the doctor, at Mitchell, at these men who for 3 weeks had shown nothing but care. "Yes," she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "They will try. They will do everything they can." Akari nodded through tears. "Then let them take me." They loaded her into the ambulance. Fumiko insisted on going with her maternal authority, overriding protocol. The Marines allowed it without argument. The ambulance drove away, leaving the rest of the group in anxious silence. Hours crawled past. Mitchell paced, glancing toward the road. Keiko understood he'd seen too many mothers die. If they could save this one, perhaps war could end with something right. 4 hours passed, then 5. The sun began to set. Finally, the ambulance returned. Everyone rushed forward. The back doors opened and Fumiko climbed out first. Her face was streaked with tears, but she was smiling. "A boy," she announced. "Akari has a son." The relief was so intense it was almost painful. Women wept openly. Children cheered without fully understanding why. The doctor emerged next, looking exhausted but satisfied. He spoke through the interpreter. "The surgery was difficult. She lost a lot of blood. The baby was in distress. But both mother and child are alive. The baby is small, only about 3 pounds, but he's breathing on his own. He's a fighter." Then he said something that made everyone go silent. "We needed blood for the transfusion. We didn't have enough of her type readily available. 3 of our men volunteered to donate on the spot. They're in there now, resting after giving blood." The women stared. 3 American soldiers had given their blood to save a Japanese woman and her baby. Fumiko's voice shook when she spoke. "Which men?" The doctor listed the names: Corporal Turner, the young man from Texas who had made them apple pie; Private Cohen, a quiet Jewish soldier from Brooklyn; and Sergeant Mitchell. Keiko felt the world tilt. Mitchell had given his own blood, had literally given part of himself to save their enemy's child. The doctor continued, "The baby will need to stay in the field hospital for at least 2 weeks, maybe more, until he's strong enough. Akari can stay with him. We've set up a space for her." And he added, looking at Fumiko, "If one other woman wants to stay to help care for her, we can accommodate that." Fumiko volunteered immediately. The two women were loaded back into the ambulance with supplies and instructions. As they prepared to leave, Akari appeared briefly at the ambulance door, holding a tiny bundle. "His name is Isamu," she called out to the group. Her voice was weak but clear. "It means courage, because he was born from courage. Theirs and ours." The ambulance drove away again, this time carrying not prisoners but patients under care. That evening, the remaining women sat in stunned silence. The three soldiers who had donated blood were resting in their barracks, having been given orders to take it easy for 24 hours. Keiko made a decision. She organized the women to prepare something special. They had limited supplies, but they pooled what they had. Using rice the Americans had provided, they made onigiri rice balls, the traditional Japanese comfort food. They wrapped them carefully in clean cloth. The next morning, Keiko approached the barracks where the three soldiers were recovering. She carried the basket of rice balls with Yuki and several other women behind her. Mitchell emerged first, looking surprised to see them. "We made you something," Keiko said through the interpreter. "It's not much, but in Japan, when someone does something honorable, we try to show our gratitude. You gave your blood for our family, for our future. This is insufficient thanks, but it is all we can offer." She bowed deeply. Behind her, every woman and child bowed as well, a formal expression of profound gratitude. Mitchell looked overwhelmed. He called Turner and Cohen out. The three men stood awkwardly, clearly unused to such formal recognition. Cohen spoke first, his Brooklyn accent, strong even in English. The interpreter translated. "Ma'am, my mother always taught me saving a life is like saving the whole world. That's from our tradition." I couldn't not help. Turner added his own words. "Back home in Texas, we got a saying, you do what's right because it's right, not because someone's watching. That girl and her baby needed help. Simple as that." Mitchell simply nodded, accepting their gratitude in silence. "In our culture," Keiko said quietly, "you've made yourselves family." She handed Mitchell the basket. "Please, eat. These are made with gratitude." The three soldiers tried the onigiri, simple rice simply prepared but made with care and meaning. Turner's eyes widened. "Ma'am, this is delicious. Thank you." Cohen nodded agreement. "My mother would love these. She's always trying new recipes." They sat together, then Americans and Japanese sharing food and halting conversation through interpretation. The children played nearby, no longer afraid. Hiro brought his lizard to show Turner, who admired it with exaggerated enthusiasm. The days continued. Akari and baby Isamu remained at the field hospital, recovering well. Reports came back regularly. The baby was gaining weight. Akari was healing. Both would survive. As October moved into November, the preparations for departure intensified. The women received new clothes. Simple dresses, undergarments, shoes. For many, these were the first new clothes they had worn in over a year. Yuki twirled in her new dress, the skirt flaring around her. "Mama, I feel like a real person again." The words cut Keiko deeply. That her daughter had felt like less than a person. That the war had done that to a 6-year-old child. But also gratitude that now here she felt human again. Medical examinations confirmed everyone was healthy enough to travel. Red Cross supplies arrived for the journey. 1 week before departure, the commander organized a farewell gathering. It wasn't required. It wasn't part of any official protocol. But he felt it mattered. Tables were set up outside under the stars. A last meal together, Americans and Japanese. Former enemies sharing space and food, and the strange peace that had grown between them. The final meal was simple but complete. When Hiro tasted Coca-Cola for the first time, the carbonation made him sneeze. Laughter rippled across language barriers. After the meal, the commander stood to speak. The gathering fell silent. "Ladies and children," he began, his voice carrying in the cool evening air. "Tomorrow you begin your journey home. It's been an honor to ensure your safety these past weeks." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "War brings out the worst in humanity. We've all seen that, but it can also bring out the best if we choose it. You came to us as enemies defined by politics and propaganda. You leave as mothers and children we've been privileged to protect." He gestured to his men. "These soldiers have shown what it means to be truly strong. Not through violence, but through restraint. Not through cruelty, but through compassion. They've proven that winning a war means nothing if we lose our humanity in the process." Fumiko stood then. Without planning to, without permission, she simply rose from her seat. Every eye turned to her. "Colonel Harrison-san," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her 67 years. "When we were captured, I believed I knew what Americans were. I believed the propaganda that told me you were demons without mercy or honor." She paused, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. You gave us food when we expected death. You gave us medicine when we expected neglect. You gave us dignity when we expected shame. Most remarkably, you gave your own blood to save a Japanese baby who had done nothing to earn such sacrifice except exist." Her voice grew stronger. "I cannot erase the propaganda, but I choose to remember what you showed me, that even in war, humanity survives. That mercy can exist between enemies. That true strength is choosing kindness when violence would be easier." She bowed deeply, a bow of profound respect reserved for those of highest honor. "On behalf of these mothers and children, I say thank you. Thank you for seeing us as human beings. Thank you for proving that your country's ideals are not just words but actions. May your children grow up knowing their fathers were men of true honor." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Corporal Turner stood. He snapped to attention and saluted Fumiko. Not a casual gesture, but a full military salute of respect. One by one, every American soldier present stood and saluted. Not because they were ordered to, not because protocol demanded it, but because this old Japanese woman had spoken a truth they all felt, and her recognition of their humanity deserved recognition in return. Keiko watched this moment and knew she would remember it forever, would tell her children and grandchildren, would ensure that history recorded not just the battles, but this moment when former enemies acknowledged each other's humanity. After the formal gathering ended, people mingled. The rigid separation that had existed in the first days was gone. Americans and Japanese spoke through interpreters, shared stories, showed photographs. Keiko found herself alone with Sergeant Mitchell one last time. The evening was cooling, stars brilliant overhead. They stood a respectful distance apart, but the gulf between enemy and enemy had somehow transformed into the space between two people who had shared something important. "Sergeant Mitchell-san," Keiko began, "I want you to know something. When my husband died, I thought I understood what honor meant. Dying for your country, dying to protect others. That seemed like the highest form of honor." She looked at him directly. "But you taught me there's another kind of honor. Living according to your principles, even when no one is watching. Choosing mercy when you have the power to choose cruelty. That's a harder kind of honor. A braver kind." Mitchell shook his head slightly. "Ma'am, I just tried to do what my mama taught me. Treat people right. Your mother raised a good man. I wish I could meet her. I would tell her your son saved lives not by taking them, but by treating them with dignity." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, a copy of Yuki's drawing. "I'm teaching my children about two kinds of strength. The strength my husband showed protecting others in battle, and the strength you showed protecting others in peace. Both are necessary. Both are honorable. My children will grow up knowing that enemies can become teachers." Mitchell took the paper, his hands gentle. "Mrs. Matsumoto, can I tell you something? That first morning when I saw you holding your kids, is all I could think was, please God, let this end well. Let me do something right. Let me prove we're better than their fear." His voice cracked slightly. "At Marpy Point, I watched mothers jump with their babies because they believed we were monsters. When I found you in that shed, I knew this was my second chance to prove mercy defeats fear." Keiko felt tears on her face. "You got your second chance, and you chose well." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Mitchell reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, the same wallet with photos of his children. He opened it and showed her something new. Yuki's drawing tucked carefully beside his family photos. "I'm keeping this forever. When I get home, I'm going to frame it, put it on my office wall, and when people ask about it, I'll tell them about a little girl named Yuki who reminded me why we fight. Not to destroy, but to protect. Not to create enemies, but to create the possibility of peace. He closed the wallet carefully. Mrs. Matsumoto, will you do something for me when you tell your children about the war? About this time, will you tell them that not all Americans were cruel, that some of us tried to do right? I will tell them the truth, that propaganda taught us to fear demons, but experience showed us human beings, that the enemy fed us when they could have starved us, healed us when they could have let us die, treated us with dignity when they could have shown contempt. She smiled through her tears. I will tell them about Sergeant Bobby Mitchell from Iowa, who carried photos of his children and remembered his mother's teachings even in the middle of war. I will tell them you were a good man in bad circumstances and that goodness matters more than circumstances. Mitchell extended his hand, a Western gesture of respect. Keiko took it without hesitation. They shook hands, two people from different worlds who had found common ground in the middle of destruction. Safe journey, Mrs. Matsumoto. I hope your children grow up in a world with less hate and more breakfasts. Thank you, Sergeant Mitchell. I hope you return safely to your farm and your family. I hope your children know how lucky they are to have a father like you. And they parted, then both knowing they would almost certainly never see each other again. Geography, politics, and the vast differences in their worlds made reunion impossible. But both knew this moment mattered. This goodbye carried weight. The next morning arrived too quickly. The transport trucks were ready. Akari and baby Isamu had been released from the field hospital the day before, both healthy enough to travel. The tiny boy, now weighing almost 4 pounds, slept peacefully in his mother's arms. The 47 women and children gathered their belongings, new clothes, supplies, letters from the Red Cross to carry home. Your story will be published in our official report, Mrs. Patterson said. It will be used in military training. You've helped change how we think about prisoners of war. That's an important legacy. Keiko clutched the papers. If it helps even one person choose mercy over cruelty, then everything we endured will have meant something. The trucks were loaded. Children climbed in, excited for the adventure of riding in vehicles. Women settled themselves, nervous about the journey ahead, but no longer terrified. Before they departed, every woman lined up to bow to the Marines who had protected them. Some of the soldiers looked uncomfortable with the formal recognition, but they bowed back, honoring the gesture. Hero ran to Mitchell one last time, wrapping his small arms around the American's legs. Bye-bye, Mr. Soldier. Thank you for chocolate and bread and being nice. Mitchell knelt down, pulling a final Hershey's bar from his pocket. For the trip, buddy. You're a brave kid. Take care of your mama. Yuki approached more formally. She handed Mitchell a new drawing she had made that morning. This one showed the same scene as before, but now there were more details. American and Japanese flags side by side. The table of food in the center, and above it the word peace, written in both English and Japanese. For when you go home, Yuki said quietly. So you remember us. Mitchell's eyes were wet as he took the drawing. I could never forget you, Miss Yuki. Never. The engine started. The moment of departure had arrived. As the trucks began to roll, Keiko looked back one last time. Sergeant Mitchell stood at attention, hand raised in salute. Around him, every Marine present did the same. A final gesture of respect. The journey to the ships took several hours. Keiko held her children close and thought about what came next. Going home to a defeated nation, to families who might not understand, but also going home to possibility, to peace, to a future where her children might grow up without fear. Gray Navy vessels waited at the dock. Hundreds of Japanese civilians were being returned home from various islands, each with their own story. Aboard ship, Keiko learned some camps where terrible others showed mercy. War wasn't one story, but millions each, different, each true. The voyage took 5 days. On the third day, Red Cross representatives distributed mail that had been waiting for them. Letters from families who had received word that their loved ones were alive. Keiko's hands shook as she opened the envelope addressed to her. Her mother's handwriting, her father's seal. She read through tears. Dearest Keiko, we received your message. Father and I wept with joy for hours. We had feared the worst, believed you were dead. To know you and the children are alive is a miracle beyond words. You write that Americans treated you with mercy. You sound uncertain, afraid we might judge you for accepting their help. Daughter, listen carefully. Hiroshi loved his children above all else. He died protecting life, not destroying it. If you kept his children alive by accepting enemy kindness, you honored his memory. You did not betray him. You fulfilled his final wish. We have prepared a room for you. Your father rebuilt the damaged section of our house. We have saved ration tickets. We have hope again for the first time since the war began. Come home, Keiko. Whatever happened, you are still our daughter. Yuki and Hiro are still our grandchildren. That is all that matters. Hiroshi's spirit would be proud that you protected his legacy. Come home to those who love you. Keiko clutched the letter and sobbed. Relief so intense it was almost pain. Her family would accept them. They would have a home. The children would know their grandparents, innards. Everything might actually be all right. Around her, other women were reading similar letters, families welcoming them home, expressing relief and love and acceptance. The fear that they would be rejected for surviving was proving largely unfounded. The port was chaos. Then Keiko heard her mother's voice. Keiko, Keiko. Her mother and father pushed through the crowd. Both looked older than Keiko remembered, worn down by worry and war and grief. But when they saw their daughter and grandchildren, they seemed to shed years. The reunion was a tangle of embraces and tears. Her father, who had always been reserved, picked up Yuki and Hiro and held them like he would never let go. Her mother touched Keiko's face, her hair, her hands, as if confirming she was real. You came back, her mother whispered. You brought them back. Oh, my daughter, you came back. They went home together to the small house in Tokyo that had survived the bombings through luck more than anything else. The neighborhood was damaged but not destroyed. Life was continuing, difficult and uncertain, but continuing. That night, Keiko told her parents everything. Her father listened, then spoke. To hear Americans showed mercy contradicts all we were taught. I observed it daily, father. It was real. Her mother added, Hiroshi would be proud you kept his children alive. Keiko felt the validation she needed. Her husband's family would take longer to convince, she knew. His brother was still struggling with the idea that she had accepted enemy help. But her parents understood, and that was enough for now. Keiko returned to teaching. For 40 years, every September 15th, she brought students to her classroom early. She would place bread on a small table and tell them, this is what mercy looks like. This is what changes the world. Her students learned propaganda breeds fear, but experience reveals truth. Years passed. Yuki became a peace educator. Hiro, an engineer, named his first son Hiroshi Robert, honoring both father and the American who showed mercy. When the boy turned 3, Hiro took him to the rebuilt harbor where they had landed in 1945. Your name carries 2 stories of honor, he told his son. Never forget that enemies can become teachers. 25 years later, a letter arrived from Iowa. Mitchell had kept Yuki's drawing framed in his office. Her testimony had been used in military training. He asked if her children were well. Keiko replied immediately, Yuki teaches peace studies. Hiro has a son named Hiroshi Robert. Your kindness echoes through generations. For 15 years, letters crossed the Pacific. They never met again, but the bond endured. When Mitchell died in 1985, Keiko wept for the man she'd known 6 weeks, but who'd changed her life forever. 10 years later, Yuki spoke at his memorial in Iowa. Sergeant Mitchell showed us that mercy is not weakness, she said. He proved that seeing humanity in your enemy takes more courage than seeing only their threat. Because he chose kindness, I'm standing here today. My children exist because he gave my mother a chance to survive. That choice rippled through time. Mitchell's daughter gave Yuki his final letter. That drawing you gave me has been one of my most treasured possessions. It represents the moment I knew mercy had defeated fear. Thank you for showing me that even in war we have choices. Yuki clutched the letter and wept, for the loss, for the connection, for the extraordinary, ordinary man who had shown her family mercy when mercy was neither required nor expected. Today, Keiko's testimony is taught in both Japanese and American schools, the story of the breakfast that proved mercy can defeat fear. Keiko lived to 87. Her final words to Yuki, keep telling them, the story matters, mercy matters, humanity matters. And Yuki has kept that promise. Because some acts of mercy echo so loudly through time, they never stop ringing. That's the legacy of September 15th, 1945. Not just that American soldiers fed Japanese prisoners, but that they proved something eternal. We always have a choice: fear or understanding, propaganda or observation, hate or humanity. And when we choose mercy, the world becomes just a little bit better, one breakfast at a time.